life as real people, but it is absolutely a genuine phenomenon. It makes series books and standalone books somewhat different. For example, my most recent standalone, Thief River Falls, which came out in January, it revolves around a heroine named Lisa Power, who is a thriller writer like me and goes through a very, very intense series of experiences in this novel. When I was writing it, getting to the end of the book, it is always very difficult when you are closing the door on a standalone because you recognize that you're not going to meet those characters again. And that's sad. There's a real loss to that. And so even in looking at a series book like the Stride books, the Stride book, I know I'm going to meet Stride again in a new book. But then a character like Steve, who is Stride's close friend, when he passes away, you're losing a friend, myself as well. That's a difficult experience. And I've been very honored by how readers have reacted to this because I've had already this week so many readers writing to me and saying they were in tears by the end of chapter 1 as Stride and Steve have their final deathbed conversation. So yeah, as a writer, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. Now, I will tell you that there are also always sort of interesting little real-world backstories to these things. And in the case of the name Steve Garsky, that's actually the name of a real person who had bid on the opportunity to be in a Stride book for a nonprofit organization. We were doing a special auction to raise money for an organization called Wishes and More. And so Steve won the bid to get his name in, I think it was The Cold Nowhere, one of my Stride novels. And I've used Steve as a character in several of the books since then. Of course, I have another good friend who is a radio DJ here in the Twin Cities named John Hines, who also happens to be very good friends with Steve Garsky. John has been needling me for several books to just kill off Steve Garsky already. So this time around, I actually did that and sent Steve an advanced copy of the book with the inscription, R.I.P. Steve Garsky. So.
Yeah, that's great.
How did he take it?
He was okay with it. I said, hey, you and Stride had a good run.
Well, that was a great first chapter of a book. It definitely pushed me forward to find out what happens.
And that, of course, is always the challenge, I think, particularly in a thriller, is you just want that opening to grab the reader by the throat. And you can layer in other things as you go in terms of the characters in the story, but you really want to start off in such a way that the reader just has to turn those pages to find out what happens next.
Since this is my first Stride novel and I was getting to know the characters, I at first thought Kat was way too over-sexualized for such a young woman. But in learning about her past, I can see she has a lot of psychological baggage. How did you get into the mindset of such a traumatized young woman?
There's two things there. I mean, one is saying that's your first Stride novel. There are now 10 novels in the Stride series. Funeral for a Friend is the most recent. And I have a number of readers who will say, well, I haven't met Stride before. Do I have to go all the way back to the beginning and start with my very first book, IMMORAL, and kind of go all the way through? As a writer, I always say, well, that's behavior I highly encourage. Sure, go back and buy all the books. I write each novel in the Stride series like a standalone. I want you to have a full, rich appreciation of the series characters in each book, and I try to avoid spoilers from the earlier books. And I think of it the way people think about meeting people in their lives. I mean, you're not only going to be friends with people that you met in your teens or 20s, you're going to meet people throughout your life. And once you get to know someone and you like who they are, then you're sort of interested in going back and finding out more of their stories and how they got to that point in their lives. And I think the same is true of a good series, that you ought to be able to get to know Stride in any of the book and like him as a character and as a hero, and it makes you simply want to find out more about the other experiences he's had in his life. And then you look at a character like Kat. I love Kat as a character. She has obviously been through some very, very difficult things in her life. We first met Kat back in The Cold Nowhere, and The Cold Nowhere is an extremely difficult book for her, and she was a homeless, abused teenager, and she shows up soaking wet, hiding in Stride's closet when he comes home one night. And he needs to find out who this girl is and what her connection to him is from his past, and find out who, in fact, is stalking this girl. And so really Stride and Serena in The Cold Nowhere begin to rescue Kat from this life she's had. And as they do that at the same time, I think Kat is also rescuing them and serving to repair some problems that Stride and Serena had gone through in their own relationship. And that has then evolved over the last several books. And what you see with Kat is that she's impetuous and she doesn't always make the right choices, and she kind of charges in without really thinking through what she's doing, which makes her a teenager. And yet you can also see a slow maturing process with Kat as a character as well. I think with any character, it is always a question of how do you get inside their head. And it's not so much a question of how do I write a character who's a teenage girl. It's more a question of how do I let a character like Kat channel their essence through me? And that's kind of an important creative distinction for a writer. I'm not trying to impose a certain character on someone like Kat. I'm not trying to make them behave the way I want them to behave. I'm really trying to let them show me how they would behave as real people. And it's kind of a trust building process between the author and the character. And so if you believe in that, then you can really allow any character, I think, to come to life on the page, because you're just sort of acting as the medium by which that character establishes who they are. When I wrote a book called The Deep, Deep Snow, it actually comes out in paperback late in October. It was a New York Times audio bestseller last year. It was an Audible original. The Deep, Deep Snow is told in the first person through a young female sheriff's deputy. She's 25 years old at the start of the book. And that was a fascinating creative experience for me. I had never written a mystery in the first person, and to do so and then have a woman as the narrator as well, for me it was fascinating to watch how that developed, because it was kind of like I had to get Shelby, who is the narrator, I had to get her to trust me, to allow me to tell her story. So we were negotiating with each other in the early chapters of the book. And then we got to a chapter that by outline really wasn't intended to be a particularly key chapter in the novel. It was just sort of advancing a couple things. And yet Shelby ended up sort of unveiling a secret to me about her past in that chapter that I hadn't seen coming. And it was as if Shelby as a character had finally reached a point of trusting me with her story and her secrets. And once that happened, then the rest of the book sort of flowed more smoothly. So that's kind of how it works between the author and the characters.
After 10 Jonathan Stride books, does it ever get old? Even Conan Doyle got sick of Sherlock.
If you get tired of your series characters, then you ought to stop the series. If an author keeps on going after he or she has lost interest in the characters, I think there's no way that's not going to translate into what you see on the page. For me, it's really a question of, do these characters have more stories to tell? And as long as they do, as long as they're continuing to grow and change and evolve, then I think there's always going to be life and excitement in the series. People will ask me, do you know how the Stride series is going to end? And I always tell them I have no idea. And I know that someone like J.K. Rowling said that, well, she knew what was going to happen in the Harry Potter series from the beginning, which is perfectly fine. I don't have a clue what's going to happen in the long run with the Stride series, because Stride, when you meet him in Funeral for a Friend, is a very different man, a very different kind of hero than he was in my very first book, Immoral. And that's because he has changed over the course of all of the things that have happened to him in the books. And when I start a new Stride book, the first thing I'm doing is thinking about where the lives of those series characters are and what kinds of things are going to be happening and how are they going to be evolving and changing. And as long as that's going on, then I think you're always going to have exciting stories to tell about the characters. So as long as they're continuing to grow, then I think the series is going to always excite the author as well.
Do you get a lot of questions from your fans on where the direction should go?
Oh, yes, the readers are never shy about giving me their ideas about things. And that's always fun. I mean, what it really shows you is the extent to which these characters become very real for the readers. And that's part of the experience. I had a great question from a reader a few years ago. She asked me, if I met Stride on the street, would I recognize him? And I said, well, I don't think that I would, but I bet you would. Because for me, I very deliberately paint Stride in watercolors. I want to provide enough detail to seed the reader's imagination and have you fill in the gaps of that character in your mind. And so I think as a result, that's why readers become very close to someone like Stride and very emotionally connected to him, because they share in the creative process of bringing that character to life in their imaginations. And as a result, I think they have a strong attachment to those characters and they want to see what happens next.
That is so true, because I have certain series that I absolutely love, and when they cast them in a movie or in a TV show, it's always kind of a letdown because it's not what's in your mind of what you picture these characters to be.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's why passionate readers always struggle with movie and TV adaptations, because they have this very vivid image of this character in their mind, and inevitably what shows up on the screen is going to be different from the way they've imagined it.
Brian, you have really given us a glimpse into the writing process, and it's very interesting. What are you doing now in your process? I think you said at the beginning you're working on a new Jason Bourne novel. Do you have anything else in the works?
I'm keeping pretty busy. I'm actually working on 3 novels this year. I did 3 last year. I'm working on 3 this year. I've already finished a new standalone thriller called Infinite, and Infinite will be coming out in March of next year. And I love that book. It is far and away the most unusual thriller I've ever written, and yet it's also a classic Brian Freeman thrillers. Infinite starts, as my thrillers always do, with a very emotional situation in which a man has lost his wife in an accident when their car goes off the road into a flooded river. So he is dealing with the grief and loss that goes along with this and trying to put his life back together. But while that is happening, he's also having a series of scary, unusual experiences where he keeps seeing visions of himself in other places. And it's as if he has this doppelganger out there who is showing up and taunting him. And so he has to understand what is really going on. And he thinks it's all part of his imagination. And yet then he meets a psychologist who tells him that he has been her patient and she has been treating him with a very unusual new therapy. So that's how Infinite gets started. It's one of my favorite books. As I say, it's very, very unusual in the light of the kinds of things I've done, and yet it's also very much a classic Brian Freeman thriller. So I can't wait to get that in the hands of readers. And then I'm working on 2 more books simultaneously right now. I'm working on the next Jason Bourne novel called The Bourne Treachery, which will be out next summer. And I'm doing a follow-up book to The Deep, Deep Snow, which will come out next year as an Audible original again. So it'll initially be an audiobook exclusive. So yeah, I've got a lot on my plate, but the nice thing is all of these projects are so very different from each other. And that's one of the things I find energizing and inspirational, is the fact that I can put down one project and pick up something else that takes me to a whole new kind of story and very, very different characters.
And how about Jonathan Stride? Anything new on that horizon?
A Stride certainly will come back. I don't know yet exactly when that will be, but there will certainly be more Stride for readers in the future.
Definitely keep us posted on all of these. They definitely sound like right up our alley.
Excellent.
And can you tell our listeners your website so they can keep track of what's coming and what's already been?
Absolutely. Readers can find me pretty much everywhere online. My website is bfreemanbooks.com. That's all one word, bfreemanbooks.com. And they can find descriptions of all of my book and sales links and my blog and links to Marcia's blog. And then they can also find me on social media. My Twitter and Instagram handles are also B Freeman Books, one word, B Freeman Books. And then over on Facebook, they can like my fan page. That is facebook.com/B Freeman Fans, facebook.com/B Freeman Fans. And I love hearing from readers. I love it when they send me emails and post on my page and ask questions. I always encourage people to get in touch with me after they've read one of my books and let me know what they think.
Brian, we thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. We loved this book and look forward to all the next Brian Freeman books. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting with all of you and look forward to doing so again.
Well, I have another series that I wish I would have discovered sooner, but I've got 10 books to go back and check out. I have to say, I really enjoyed Stride, and Jonathan Stride kind of reminds me of a Lucas Davenport type character. He has a tough exterior, but he definitely has a soft side when it comes to his family. And I love Lucas Davenport, so I was all in on Jonathan Stride.
I agree. There's a lot of correlation between this series and
even the area they kind of take place.
I was curious as to whether he said it in Minneapolis. I didn't know.
The family dynamic is very close to a Sanford
I'm a huge Lucas Davenport fan, so
I am too.
when I started reading his, I was like, yes, because you can't always get a new Lucas Davenport, so now I have a whole new character to wrap my teeth into.
He did say he writes each of his books as almost a standalone. So,
and I really felt that it was. I didn't feel